Good morning. My name is Lauren Gill, and I am the Director of Networks and Course Development for City to City's Global Faith and Work Initiative. We want to welcome you to our webinar on caring for yourself as you care for others. Due to the size of this call, we are going to hold all questions for a time of Q&A at the end of the session. But if at any point during the seminar you have a question, you can submit it using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I also want to let you know that we will be sending you slides to this webinar and a follow-up email, so you don't have to worry about frantically trying to capture everything that you see on the slides. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to give you a sense of who is on the call watching the webinar today. The breakdown of professions is as follows. 18% of you are pastors or ministry leaders. 10% of you are counselors or social workers. Another 10% are educators. 34% of you work in another position or at a corporate entity or nonprofit. We have participants joining us today from 10 countries. And when we asked you what the most difficult thing has been during this season, many of you said exhaustion, burnout, and difficulty caring for yourselves and your own needs when there were so many demands on your time from others. Several of you also said in-person relationships or Zoom fatigue has been difficult, and some of you even said the loss of loved ones. So we know the burdens are great for many of you, and we hope this webinar will provide you with some tools to shoulder those burdens. I'm now going to introduce Ellen Lee. Ellen holds a master's degree in counseling psychology from Columbia University and a Bachelor of Science in Human Development and Family Studies from Cornell University. She also has an advanced certificate in biblical counseling from the Christian Counseling Educational Foundation. Her specialties include anxiety, abuse, eating disorders, and marital and premarital counseling, and she is bilingual and bicultural. Ellen is also a trust-based relational intervention practitioner that specializes in issues of attachment and trauma. And at Redeemer Counseling, Ellen oversees the professional and pastoral counselor training and workshops, including the Counseling Fellows Program. So Ellen, thank you so much for joining us, and I will hand it over to you now.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Lauren. It is my pleasure to be here with you guys today. I know that it's been a tough season for all of us. This is not business as usual, and we have so many challenges, and all of us are feeling it. So it's my pleasure to be able to share a little bit of what may kind of a way of understanding what we're going through, and hopefully that will also inform how we deal with it the best that we can. But there are no magic bullets. This is going to be a hard season, but we can try to make it a little bit better for ourselves so that we are coming out of it in a better position than just being defenseless. So that is my hope today. And I'm going to share my slides with you. And there we go. Okay. So yeah, we're talking about caring for yourself as you care for others. And here are some of my objectives for today. Like I said, first, I want to start with some understanding, how we understand our current global experience. Obviously, my experience is going to be more about New York and North America, but still, I think all of us all over the world are going through some similarities with the pandemic. And then in understanding our global experience, also then looking a little bit at our secondary trauma as caregivers, as pastors or social workers or counselors, we are shouldering more of the burden, so we'll try to understand it a bit more, and then that will inform the ways that we could think about how to build resilience and process our own trauma, as well as help guide ministry in terms of caring for others and support and helping others to grieve and process their trauma. So everything we talk about today, I want you to look through applying both for yourself and to people around you, that people that you minister to or your family members, whoever it is, your loved ones. So think about how this applies to yourself and to others, both in understanding. That's how we're going to start. First, understanding, and then what that implies in terms of our self-care and to ministry to others. And everything we also talk about today, I'm going to try to look at it through two lenses. One is special revelation, biblical lens. How do we understand what we are going through from the lens of the gospel and the Bible, but also then general revelation, what has God revealed to us about who we are as human beings through science, ecology, biology, all of that, because that will give us more wisdom about how we are wired, how God has wired us and what we could do to help ourselves. And some of you are more in the profession of social work or counseling. Some of this is going to be reviewed to you, but bear with us. Not everybody has that background, so we're going to spend some time in that embodied souls, how God has wired us as spirit beings, but in a body, and they're intricately connected and they cannot be disconnected. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So theologically speaking, what are we experiencing? In a nutshell, it is the thorns and thistles. Since Genesis 3, the pain of living in a broken world. So Romans says, Romans 8:22, for we know that the whole creation has been groaning together, and we are experiencing that for sure. So the sickness, death, trauma of various kinds, it is all our creation being broken and all of it groaning with us. And like Lauren mentioned, when we asked what are some most difficult things, these are some of the top things that you guys have mentioned. Exhaustion and fatigue being top, with so many needs and responsibilities, no time for self. I love the way, feeling helpless. I love the way this one person put it. Change of ministry format and relationship as we knew them has completely changed. So everything has changed, right? We are needing to adapt, and that all takes a lot of work. Physical distance, doing relationship virtually, loss of loved ones, uncertainty, anxiety, overwhelm, and collective grief over trauma and suffering. So this is graphically kind of how I try to, and it's not perfect science, it's just a way of kind of trying to encapsulate what we are experiencing. So yeah, sickness, fear for health, even if we're not actually sick, just knowing that we can get sick and trying to be hypervigilant about that. Uncertainty, some of you have lost jobs, financial loss or uncertainty of your ministry, how it's going to be in the future, financially, all those things. Injustice with both the pandemic and how it's playing out, who's getting more sick, and also the recent racial injustice issues, death, no boundaries. We are all having to do it all from a single space, and we have no work-life boundary anymore, family, school, and isolation is a huge one as well. So all of these things are basically our souls, because we are wired for eternity. This is all jarring to us, and it is saying it is not the way it was supposed to be, and we are feeling that. So in a nutshell, what are we experiencing? Theologically, like I said, we're suffering and groaning. Psychologically translated, I would say at best, we are all in chronic stress or some kind of trauma. So we want to talk a little bit about understanding that a little bit better. So first, I want to say traumatic response is a normal response to an abnormal situation. It is a God-wired response to help us cope with broken world. So he has given us a built-in alarm system so that when we detect threat or danger, rapid involuntary response kick in so that we survive. And I want to highlight that it is very rapid and it's involuntary. That's why we call it autonomic nervous system. So if a dinosaur or a tiger or something's coming after you, we go into sympathetic mode, fight or flight, because that will keep us alive. And the danger signal is super quick. We don't have a whole lot of time to think about it. And then when we are at peace and nothing much is going on, we are at parasympathetic mode, which is rest and digest. And this works really well when you have a single threat. So there's a threat, your sympathetic system kicks in, it does certain things to your body, like pump blood and your heartbeat and all of that, so that you could fight or flight and safety is restored. And when safety is restored, you could relax again and go back into parasympathetic mode. But I will note that because God has wired us to be smart, our body then will store some traumatic memory of what places to avoid, what kinds of things are dangerous, so that we learn. So we learn from that experience. So there is a memory that stays with us in our body for that experience. And again, this is all good when there's a single event. But what happens that when stress or trauma is repeated and prolonged, what we call chronic stress or chronic trauma, then threat happens, and your sympathetic kicks in, but it can't really get rid of threat or the stress. It keeps on, the alarm system keeps on going on because it's continuing or there's no relief. So then your body kind of gets stuck in fight or flight mode. And your ability to get into a regulatory parasympathetic mode is underutilized. And all of that has an impact on your body. So there's nothing your body does that your soul will not experience, or the other way too. If you feel anxious, it will show up somewhere in your body. We are intricately connected and we cannot separate the two. So the sympathetic mode is increased cortisol. It revs up the body so that you could react fast. But all of that being in your body for a long time is going to have an impact on how you feel, both physically and emotionally. And so therefore, some of the things that you are experiencing, like exhaustion, numbness, all of those things. So having said that, the second way we think about trauma then is not that trauma is not what happened to a person, but what happened in the person's body as a result of an event. So here's an example of car collision. So traumatic event will be the crash itself. So two cars get into a crash and there's an accident. That is a traumatic event. But trauma is sustained by the cars. And the level of trauma sustained by the cars will depend on how fast the cars were going, how robust or strong the cars were, how well built, or it would vary on a lot of different things. It could be a fender bender, it could be a total crash. But no matter what it is, just because a traumatic event ended and the accident is done, you know that the car will not be just going back to its normal, the way it used to be. Without some intentional work, this trauma that the cars have sustained will not go back to normal. And that is the same with our body. So it is something that's happening to our body. And even if the event is over, the impact that those events and the stress responses have had on our body will not just automatically disappear just because the event is over. And there's a third thing that we want to understand about our body. So we talked about the two systems, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Sympathetic kicks in when there's signal of danger because you want to do something about it. You want to fight it or run away. But when that danger is so great that there's a life threat, then you go into dorsal vagal mode, which is immobilized, shut down. And this is how you understand animals that get petrified when they're in an accident. So our body just says, there's no way to run, no way to fight this, so I'm just gonna shut down and feign death because that would be the best way of survival. So we go into this collapse mode. And this is the freeze response that we think about. And why this is important is because depending on the trauma, we are going from sympathetic to this shutdown mode. And the longer your stress goes on and you feel like you can't help it, the helplessness kicks in and you may be moving down to this place of being more shut down. And that leads to possibility of burnout. So initially when we get into this pandemic, you might have been mobilized, we got to do something, we got to, how do we figure out a new way of doing things? How do we help other people? But then as it goes on for a long time, your body begins to go into more shutdown mode because it's been going on a long time and you feel a lot of helplessness. And all of these things that we just talked about, whether you move up this ladder to this safe, connected place or life threat, you pick up by cues, visceral cues. So traumatic danger signal comes in through sensory and your right brain. Our left brain is way too slow. The logical brain is way too slow for us to reliably use, and God is not wired for that as a signal for danger. So if I look at flame, I put my hand there. If I have to logically process, oh, flame, my hand, probably hot, burn, take it off, that's too slow. So it's sensory. As soon as my hand goes near the flame, I feel the hot, I pull away. So Um, Here's a picture. As you look at the picture, I want you to just notice how you feel. I look at this picture and I know that I'm sitting here in a webinar with you guys, and I know that this is just a picture, but there's a little bit of dread, little bit of feeling of, ooh, I don't want to go down that alley, whatever that is, and a little bit of stiffening up, because it's the visceral cues that give us sense of danger. Same thing with thunder. Little kids, my son is really scared of thunder, and he knows it's not going to hurt him, but it's the loud noise and the visceral cues that just get his body up for danger signals. So it's the loud bangs. You don't know what it is. Your body just goes into sympathetic mode. So we are taking in clues about safety and our world through these sights and sounds and smells, touch and taste. So just know that our sensory input is having a huge impact on whether we feel stressed or shut down or feeling relaxed. There's a sixth one down there that I put down there, which is story, because our brain does not actually distinguish between imagined sensory input and real sensory input. Hearing stories and imagination will have similar impact. That's why I could sit in a movie knowing that I'm in a movie and still be very, very scared when I'm watching a horror movie of some kind. And this is the reason why I'm saying this is because a lot of us are in helping professions and we are hearing other people's stories. So it may not be that you are seeing these sounds or sights or feeling these things directly, but their stories, as you take them in, it's also impacting you as well. So this is one definition of traumatic event. It's an occurrence where an individual sees, and I underline that because it's about experience, sees or experience a risk to their own life or physical safety or that of other people, which is happening to all of us, right? We are having risk to our own health and death and watching other people as well, and feel terror, fear, or helplessness. The occurrence might additionally cause confusion, dissociation, and a loss of feeling of security. Traumatic occurrences test a person's observation of the world as a secure, just, and predictable place. So I would say all of us collectively, wherever you are in the world, you are feeling some of this, that sense of risk to your own life or physical safety, and for others as well, whether you're family, elderly. But as people who are in the profession of helping others, you are having additional secondary trauma and compassion fatigue. This is a quote from Figley. We have not been directly exposed to the trauma scenes, but we hear the story told with such intensity, or we, let me see if I can read that, hear similar stories so often, or we have the gift and curse of extreme empathy and we suffer. We feel the feelings of our clients, we experience their fears, we dream their dreams. Eventually, we lose a certain spark of optimism, humor. Oops, sorry, I need to go back to Zoom. There we go. Sorry about that. And hope. We tired. So that is a feeling, most of us, that we are tired. We aren't sick, but we aren't ourselves. So a visual way of kind of capturing this is, so compassion in Greek and Latin comes from to suffer with. And the official definition of compassion is sharing the painful experiences, feelings of others with a desire to alleviate it. So Jesus was often, the Bible goes, he saw, he felt compassion, and he's moved to action, right? So it's sharing the painful feelings of others with a desire to alleviate it. And that is an important thing because that's what ends up leading us to feel helpless. So this is the graphic description of, and you remember this is how I portrayed it. So we are all experiencing this ourselves, but then on top of it, you're also carrying other people's stories, other people's burdens. And it is a lot. You guys are all feeling a lot. And so that sense of helplessness with the desire to help it's more likely to lead you down to this feeling of immobilized and feeling helpless and shut down. And we want to prevent that. So some of the signs of compassion fatigue are exhaustion, reduced sense of accomplishment, feeling of isolation, sleep disturbances, difficulty concentrating, anger, frustration, overreaction, or avoidance. Aches and pains, it would be in your body as well, muscle tension, apathy, loss of interest, loss of hope and meaning, potential depression and PTSD when this is over, and identity, worldview, and spirituality is impacted. Compassion fatigue is not the same thing as burnout, but if you do not attend to compassion fatigue, burnout will result. Burnout could happen from any work, right? I could be an accountant, but working really hard, and I may burn out. But compassion fatigue is specifically about people who are caring for others and having the extra secondary trauma from hearing the stories of others, and it could happen very quickly. So what do we do about that? So we want to talk about what we could do about that, but before we do, I want to think about trauma in one other way that will help us to think about what we could do about that. So trauma is often the result of an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope or integrate the emotions involved with that experience. So another way of putting it is trauma is unprocessed or undigested negative experience. Because it exceeds your ability to cope with it, it leaves unprocessed. I have this weird habit of thinking about psychological things in mathematical terms. Call me weird. But so this is how I think about it. So what leads to trauma is when your negative event or the stressor is greater than the resource. So the denominator is your resource. But if that's less than what you have to deal with, then that leads to trauma, that leads to unprocessed negative. So what are some of the stressors that we could think about? So it could be the level of threat. Right now, the level of threat is literally potential death because COVID has killed a lot of people. And the intensity of the event. So in New York, it's been very intense. It's been the epicenter. In some other parts of America, it might not have been as intense. The level of threat is the same, but not the intensity. And the duration of event and workload, how much work we have to do, and our interpretation that goes with that. And I'll talk a little bit more about the workload, but let's tie that in with the resources. So what are some of the resources? Some resources are more long-lasting and developmental, meaning it may be our maturity. So something's happening, same thing happening to a kid is more traumatic than to a very mature 50-year-old person because we have more resources and understanding to deal with it. It may also be our ability, personal history, that ties in with our resilience. It's our habit of resilience that comes from our personal history, and faith. These are more enduring resources. And then there are more resources that may be waning depending on the situation. So time. So for example, workload, let's think about a stressful work. Let's say I had this presentation coming, but if I only had 2 days to prepare for it, that is a lot more stressful than having 2 months to prepare for it, right? And also ability. If I've done lots and lots and lots of webinars, then it may not be as stressful. That's my ability. If I've never done a webinar, it may be much more stressful. Also sense of agency and power in that, whether I could set, when we have that webinar, all of that will impact how I experience that stressor. And also support system may be different at times, and other resources. And as we think about this COVID pandemic, literally we were wondering about resources like, are we going to have enough masks? Do we have enough hand sanitizers? Do we have enough hospital beds? So all of those things impact how stressful the stressors are. And this is basically how I would capture what we've been going through. So level of threat is very great, and the intensity of event has been pretty great too, and it's been going on for a long time without any promise of being done we don't know when it's going to be over. So there's a lot of obviously anxiety and fatigue about that. And our workload has increased tremendously. I am no longer just a counselor and a mom who goes back home to do childcare. Now I am the full-time childcare worker. I have to do his homeschooling. I had to work. There's no restaurant, so we have to cook. We have to do everything. Your workload has increased tremendously. And our interpretations of how people are handling this, how the world is doing with it, all of that impact how we feel about it. And obviously because of workload and our time is reduced greatly, our nutrition, health, all of that may be suffering. And our sense of agency and power is probably really diminished because a lot of this is out of control, completely out of our control. And our support system has completely been knocked out in a lot of ways because we cannot meet with other people. We are sheltering in place. And our ability also has probably been affected because all of us had to figure out how to hold church virtually. I remember the moment I found out that we are going to have to go virtual in all my teachings. I had 1 week to figure out how to do Zoom meetings, and that is a high stress. So all of these things are impacting us. So I'm going to transition into, so what can you do about that? And I want you to take a minute or two and just look at this graph again and think about what you could do on the top that you could reduce. And I say there are a lot of things that you can't do much about on the top, except maybe your interpretation and also workload. But I do want you to think about what can I do to maybe reduce some of that stress. And then I also want you to think about what can I do on the bottom? Again, things that I can control. There may be lots of things you can't, but don't focus on those things that you actually can do, even a little bit. What can you do to increase some of that resource on the bottom? So I want you to take a minute, and if you have a pen, pencil, notebook, just jot down a couple of those thoughts. And then once you've done them, at least begun to think about them, I want you to also then think thirdly about those things that you can maybe do to reduce the top and increase the bottom. Why do you not do that? What's the obstacle? What are the obstacles that stand in the way of doing those things? And I want you to just see what pops up to your mind. And like I said, there may be many obstacles that we cannot do anything about, like we can't go out and meet friends as we like and things like that, but things that we can control, why we don't, may reveal some idols of our hearts and our unconscious beliefs. Do I feel like I'm defined by what I do, so I can't stop? Or if I don't do this, nobody else will do it, and everything will fall apart. I should be able to do more or do it all. Do we have some belief that somehow we're not limited? Or do we worry, if I let this down, what would people think of me? Whatever they may be, I want you to just tap into what are some of your unconscious beliefs that make it hard for you to take the time that you need or do whatever it is that you need to take care of yourself better. And I want you to, after this, actually take that and go to God and hear something back from God about that, because God has things to say to you about those things. So having said that, so let's talk a little bit about, as you remove those obstacles, building resilience. So resilience is ability to bounce back. So you see this rubber band. So resilient rubber band is if you pull it back, when you let go, it springs back into shape. If it lags, that means it's not very resilient, right? So I want you to think about it that way. So once again, this polyvagal ladder. So all of these moods or systems in our body are God-given gift to us so that we are kept safe and we could survive. And they're all needed. The problem becomes when we get stuck in one of them. we are healthiest when we can move in and out of these different states as needed. So when there's danger, we get into sympathetic mode, but we can then after that relax. Um, but when we get stuck in that fight or flight or that immobilized shutdown, then we're losing that resilience, the ability to come back up. And I want to say one thing about that in terms of a lot of us may be right now going back and forth between the sympathetic and the dorsal vagal, the life threat. So we do a lot of work, we're really stressed, and then we collapse and maybe veg out and sleep. But that is not actually, even though we do need sleep, I don't diminish that at all, but that is not true rest. Um, that may be going down to shutdown, and you may be able to veg out a little bit, whatever, but we need to be able to cultivate in us an ability to come back up to that safe, connected social place. That is a very different thing than just shutting down and numbing out. Um, and again, what brings us up there is feeling safe, connected, and social. And again, that's why it is so challenging, because we live in this isolated, cannot be connected world. So we have to get very creative about that, but we do need to think of creative ways to get ourselves back up there. And like I said before, how we get there is not, we cannot will it there. We have to actually cue ourselves into that. So first thing so because of those things, this is the 3 pillars of trauma-informed care. Now, I didn't make it up. This is a well-known thing. So look at how this is what brings us to that safe place, a safe, connected, social calming system. That's why the 3 pillars is self-safety, connection, and managing emotion. That is the pillars of trauma-informed care. And that's how you need to care for yourself. And that is how you need to care for the people that you are working with. So we said trauma signal is sensory, right brain. So you need to create that felt safety. Felt safety is not knowing that you are safe. It's not a left brain knowledge. It's actually felt. So it may be sights and sounds and visual cues, or even imagery. So it could be once again, imagine places or scenarios that actually create that sense of safety in you. So I want you to watch your sensory diet. These are some things that you could do or think about. What I mean by that is we are already having a lot of sensory input that is feeling unsafe. Even when you go to the grocery store, you see people with masks, we have to stand apart. That is all feeling unsafe cues. We all have a lot of that in our lives right now, and hearing all these stories from others is giving you a lot of that as well. So when you can, you need to put some boundaries and think about what else you do with your sensory diet. They will help you come back up to that calming space in your body and in your mind. So for example, I do not take in news information through a very visual or visceral place. I take my news from a printed page. That's a very left brain thing, or from radio. Less sensational, the better. So you have to watch where you're getting your sensory diet and what you do on your off time. I would say watch a lot of things that are life-giving, that are redeeming. You need to balance out your sensory diet with the heavy things that you are getting in the world, with reminders of goodness and good things. And if you think about Viktor Frankl's, the meaning of, I forget the title of the book now, but anyways, when he talks about being in the Holocaust, it's the people who could take in some of the sensory, the beauty of the sunset or the little flower that's off to the road, whatever it is, but taking in other things that gives you calming sensory. That also means you have to be aware of what restores and replenishes for you, and it's very personal. For me, it's the beach. So I took a day off and took my kid out of, I have an almost 7-year-old, took him out of school. I said, we're gonna miss one day of school. And we went to the beach before beach opened up, because when beach opens up, they will make me feel unsafe. So I wanted to be at a beach when it was empty. So we did that. So again, it is very personal to you, and you may not be able to do that kind of thing, but even in small ways in your home, create a sensory place that feels quiet, alone, calm, beautiful. Again, that could be in your mind. It could be imagining a place like that with you and Jesus, or you know, remembering times and places with loved ones. List one thing that brings you joy, and also know when to recharge. Know your indicators to know when it is that you need to recharge. And we talked about trauma being in body, so you need to regulate the body. You need to take care of your body. You need to sleep, eat, bring all of that resilience in your body up. In 1 King 19, we see the scenario of Elijah after he battled the prophets of Baal, and he's exhausted. And I would suggest he was in flight mode. He was fighting for God, this big epic battle, and then his life was threatened by Jezebel, and he goes into collapse. And this is what God does, through an angel. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head, so he just fell asleep under this tree, a cake baked on hot stones and jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again, second time, and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. Before God speaks to him about anything else, he just restores his body through sleep, eating, replenishing. We need to take care of ourselves that way, and think about people we are serving that way as well. So I already mentioned a lot of these things. Doing even small bits of relaxation exercise is very helpful. I sleep with a weighted blanket, and I know not all of you have that, but deep pressure is very calming to the body. So good bear hugs, if you have family members that you could hug. Foot massage, hand massage, all of those things are hugely helpful. And thirdly, this is probably our biggest challenge in this season, but connect. And connection is also seen through nonverbal. So eye contact, voice quality, healthy touch when possible. So it may mean finding out who your support people are that you feel like you get these things from. And having Zoom can be very fatiguing, as many of us know. So, but it may be choosing not to have that big Zoom meeting, but finding one person to do a 10-minute conversation with, where you could have some of this back and forth positive. So yes, this is a place where we're going to need to get very creative in this season. But hopefully, as we're entering some better phases of opening, there may be some other ways that we could safely connect with people. I do want to highlight playing and laughing is really good for the bringing us up. Brain immediately feels laughter and play as safe. So if you laugh and play, it will bring you right up to that safe place. So boundaries are very important. And what I mean by that is, you know, some of you have to do childcare at home, even though you have to work. When I try to do childcare, I just try to put all work aside, and I just play with my kid, and they will restore me, even if it's, you know, 20 minutes of playing some game with him, or laughing or dancing or whatever. So it's very important to actually set aside time to bounce back to that place of connection than always being stressed. And while I'm trying to connect to him, I'm stressed about my emails. That will keep you in that stressful, sympathetic mode. So you need to come in and out of different states and create boundaries for yourself so you can do that. And you have to talk out your stress and process your thoughts. So why is it important to process? And this is both for you, and then I want you to think about also people that you're helping. Because our traumatic or any emotional memory actually lives on your right brain. And right brain is unconscious, nonverbal, implicit, and it is where our felt autobiographical narrative is housed. So our emotional memories are housed in our right brain. And even if I don't process them, it will tell me stories about who I am and how I'm doing, and it gives me that sense. I just don't know that. And also because right brain is not temporal, meaning it's not bound by time, it will affect me for a long time, even if 10 years down the road, whatever wasn't processed will continue to be with me. So processing my story with words actually help bridge that right brain to the left brain, because left brain is language and making sense of things and synthesizing and linear. And so me being able to give shape to my kind of amorphous feelings and name them and express them and talk about them integrates the right and left brain, and it integrates my experience. So what you're needing to do is, for yourself and for the people that you work with, name, sort, and express. That's both left brain activity and expressing is right brain activity. We don't want to be Job's companions when we work with other people. There are lots of good things that we could say to people, and we want to be helpful. But if truth is told to them without them processing first through their own words and mouth, then it will leave people stuck and unintegrated. That's how the head-heart disconnect happens. So I hear a lot of truths. I know they're true, but I have lots of feelings that I have not processed, and they don't connect. So you need to let them process, and you just be that safe connection for them. And as you're doing that, you're embodying God's presence and comfort and compassion to people. So what do you need to process? Your emotions and experiences. These are kind of way of thinking of causes. There's a typo, that's not cases of suffering, it's causes of suffering. But anyways, your emotions and experience, and kind of name and sort them. We do live in a fallen world, and so we have sickness and death, and that's gonna make us have some fears and sadness about that. We are watching sometimes sins of others in this, whether personal or systematic injustice. And there may be some anger or collective grief about that. I may be seeing some of my own sins, their godly sorrow. I need to sort through, what am I feeling and why do I feel them? Who am I angry at? What do I feel sad about? And sort and place them in the right place. And God is sovereign over all of these things, but that's not the place we start. Because again, I need to, and people need to feel they need to feel permission to be able to just honestly wrestle with and make sense of their emotions first. And then they do have to remember that God is still there, and we put our longings and trust in Him. But that is the rhythm of the Psalms. Psalms start with honest groaning, honest expression of what it is the psalmist is feeling. And it eventually gets to, oh, but I still remember God is my refuge. But that is not, you cannot bypass that processing. And one other thing that you need to really help people process is once they sorted things through, they need to let go of things that they cannot control, and you need to do the same, because if you hold it all, it will crush you. So you name the things that you cannot control, grieve, ask God, and entrust it in His hand, and then focus on the things that you can control so you feel empowered, so that you don't feel as helpless. And do them and own them and feel good about them. That's what I mean by own them. Even if you can't change the world, if you set out to do the thing that you can't control and you did it, you need to feel good about that so that you feel that empowered. Lastly, I'm running out of time, but this is important. Trauma impacts the spiritual. It will bring up questions of God, justice, and meaning of life. In that old definition I showed you, last sentence, traumatic occurrence tests the person's observation of the world as secure, just, and predictable place. It is meant to do that because it's jarring to us. So it is not a problem that they have questions. The issue is what we do with it. And we don't process for lots of reasons, because we fear once we go there, we might feel overwhelmed. And none of us like to feel pain, so we rather just bury it, numb it, not deal with it. And as fallen beings who are, because our sin nature, disconnected from God, we are prone to self-reliance. We rather deal with it than go to God with it. But because it is a spiritual thing, we need to run to God and receive something. So this is not my son, but it's just a picture that reminds me. So my son, he's a little bit prone to, he's very visual and sensory and scares. And whenever something happens, good or bad, he runs to me, he says, Mama, and he receives something. And that is the way children are, and that's how God wants us to be. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. If you go to Him, you get something. And you should go and get something. And this is the cycle that we looked at before. When a threat happens, sympathetic system kicks in. But if you seek comfort out of that, your situation might not change, but your need is met emotionally and you're comforted. So you may be able to get more relaxed. So when my son feels scared about a movie, um, he always says, "Mama, come sit by me." And I can't just be in the room. He can't just know, even left brain, know that I care for him. He needs to be with me, hold my hand, and then he could sit through that movie even though it's scared. And nothing, no movie plot hasn't changed because I am his resource. I have just given him comfort and regulation, and I am his resource. And God, Jesus, has to become our resource, our security, our secure place, our compassion, our connection, our regulation. And that's what God offers us in the Bible. It's consistently when there's trouble, fear not, for I am with you. He doesn't promise that he will change the circumstances, but that he promises he will be with us and that he will strengthen us and help us and uphold us. So, what are we to receive when we go to Jesus? Again, he may not give us all the answers, he may not change our circumstances, but he does give us his presence, his compassion, his comfort, and identification with us. God, in form of Jesus, literally enter voluntarily world of trauma, and he lived trauma with us. He has known sickness, he has seen multiple people who are sick, he has seen death, he has suffered, and he offers us that identification and comfort. um, and I would just add lastly that we need to receive those things experientially, and that is important for you and for the people that you work with. Like I said, because our experiences are on the right brain, just knowing that Jesus cares for me, even though that's true, is not going to help me. I have to experience it somehow. Just like my son needs to hold my hand and be next to me. So Tim Keller in Gospel Identity Conference at the end said, "Oh, how do you get gospel identity?" And he, in his uh, brilliant way, said, "You need to do it through imagination." And I just felt like, yes, but half the people here don't know what that means. Um, so yes, you have to use your imagination and right brain activities to actually soak in experientially what God has to give you. So it may be visualizing something like a picture of you in God's palm of God's hand, or him saying something to you and actually visualizing that. Or it may be the song of blessing that's been going around in the world. It may be uh, so impactful because of that, because it's a song that somebody's singing to you that's right brain activity, and they're singing as they're looking at you with these eyes. So I would say, listen to that, look at that. So you have to find ways that speak to you, that gives you an experience of Jesus's compassion, comfort, the fact that he gets you. It may be a passage of scripture that makes you know that he gets your experience, and then really visualize that, listen to him. So I'll leave you with this, that you want to develop a posture, even a practice, actual practice of hands down and hands up prayer, where once you name things and understood what things you can control that you care about, you release those things to God and to Jesus. But then you have to leave that place having received something. So in that posture of receiving his comfort and his love and his care from him, so that you do not leave unresourced, but that you actually feel filled up by him, and he does become your safety, connection, and regulation. So I want you to, at the after this is done, we have a few minutes for Q&A, but I want you to really identify one internal obstacle that you have for caring for yourself, and then hear something back from God about that. Like I said before, I want you to think about at least two concrete practices that you could do to get yourself back into that safe, rest, restore mode. And then I want you to think about one thing you could implement differently as you minister to others. So I'll leave you there with this passage. "Come to me, all who you are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So go to Jesus.
Ellen, thank you so much. That I think that was so helpful in just sort of normalizing what everyone is going through and giving, concrete terms to what they're experiencing. one good question that we've had come in is from someone who says, they feel like the re-energizing respite for them is taking a nap, and how do you balance what is self-care versus what is part of that shutdown mode that you described earlier. And even when I think about some of my own mechanisms for dealing with things, how do I know when I'm crossing over into, well, that's really shutdown mode and I'm paralyzing instead of taking care of myself?
Mhm. And like I said, I think a little bit of vegging out or shutting down initially is okay. I think it's what you do with it after. So if you just stay there or just go right back into work, that's unhelpful, right? But if you feel like I need to just shut down a little bit, but then after that, you need to do something that's actually uh, restorative. So true rest, or receive something from God, or um, recreation, do something that lightens you, or hear something beautiful that brings you back up to a place of, okay, God is with me. I am here. He's with me. I'm okay, and this is going to be okay. So, just being able to not just going to shut down and back into work mode,
Mm-hmm.
but being able to say, okay, then after this, whatever minute nap, an hour nap, feeling refreshed, breathing, whatever it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another question that's come in is, are there ways to avoid getting compassion fatigue?
Um, I would say, well, there are ways to protect yourself better than others, but I would say it's not it's not a bad thing in itself, right? Because we want to be people who care. So I could be somebody who's protecting myself and never hear anything, never hear about another person's story and shut myself off. But is that really loving? But we don't want to be unwise and just uh, unfilter and just let ourselves be there and then get into uh, being in a really helpful place. So I think it's about a balance. So it's doing how much I could do, and then I need to separate and say, this is time for me, or enough is enough. And Jesus did that beautifully. He was full of compassion. He walked with people, but even when there were multitudes waiting for him, he walked away. He went and replenished, and he received again from God and came back. So I think it's knowing, like I said before, I think that sensory diet of what's healthy for me.
Mm-hmm.
I need to care for people, but um, probably even too much of good thing is not good. So
Mm-hmm.
how do I care for people, also care for myself, and trust that God will then have them while I'm caring for myself? And
Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit about how, as a counselor, you sort of have boundaries that absolve you from guilt when you need to not overinvest in others? I think that might be helpful for some people to hear.
yeah, so I think two things. So I often say I don't know how I'll do this if I'm not a Christian, because I think one thing that's really helpful for me to think about, one of those imageries that I hold on to, is I have these clients that I work with, who I care for, 1 hour usually a week. I have to remind myself, if I really think that God is depending on me for their well-being, I am delusional. So as I walk away from them, I remind myself, God has got them. God is working in their life with or without me. I play a small part. And
Mm-hmm.
so I pray for them, and that's my release, right? God
Mm-hmm.
work in their lives for the next week, and I'll see what you've done, and I'll join in that. But it is not my work, it's God's work, and I just join that. So I fully trust that God is in it. The other how many hours of the week that he has them. And I think the other is, like I said, that owning a small part of what I could do. One of my first jobs out of grad school was actually one of the most stressful jobs. I worked in inner city Philadelphia, working with homeless and addicted moms who were at risk of losing their children. And I used to just feel so helpless, feeling like I work with them and they may be doing a little better, but once they go out, it was a transitional housing. They're going back out into very unsafe places, all of that. So I just felt like, and God really just had to bring me back to their life again. I hold. Your
Mm-hmm.
job is to make this day better for them. If you
Mhm.
love them today, that is enough. And I need to feel good about that. I cannot change their life. I need to do my job today.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great place to finish. And I know that we have some other questions that have come in, and I would recommend RCS has a practitioner's email that they send out a newsletter, which Ellen and other people often contribute to, which has tools and articles on how to care for those in your midst. And so when we send our follow-up email, I'll make sure to include the link to sign up for that. And we want to thank you so much for coming today. This is the 4th webinar that we've done on COVID-19 work disruption. And so if you'd like to see the recordings of the other webinars, you can see those at globalfaithandwork.com/resources. And we will send you the link to that, as well as the slides from today's webinar and a link to the recording when it is up on YouTube. And the Redeemer Counseling Center also has 2 offerings that they would like you to consider. If you are a pastor or a ministry leader in New York and would like to grow in your counseling skills and learn more about important mental health topics, they offer a 9-month counseling fellows program that starts in September and is currently taking applications. And Ellen, am I right that you're the one who's in charge of that program? Yes. So if you want to learn more from Ellen, that is a great opportunity if you're a pastor or ministry leader in New York. And secondly, if you are a mental health professional, they offer continuing education. They are a New York State approved site to offer continuing education units. And so you can sign up for their professionals mailing list to be notified of the CEU courses that they have. And we'll include those links in the email that we send you. And so, Ellen, I just thank you so much for your time and for sharing and teaching. It was wonderful. And we thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.